You don't know what you don't know.
Very wise.
Be open to anything that comes your way. Stick to your, I do need to have some data and clarity on that before I want to make a choice. And trust your gut instincts.
You're listening to Property Investor Tales, stories from the front yard. Here's your host, Tabitha Bright.
Hello and welcome to Property Investor Tales, stories from the front yard, where I get to speak to property investors from around Australia about their investing journey. My name's Tabitha Bright and I'm the head of coaching here at Positive Real Estate, where we help people build wealth through property. With over 8,000 clients across Australia and New Zealand, there are some incredible stories to tell, which hopefully make your investing journey that little bit easier and will inspire you along the way. So my guest today is Shay Whitton, and we discuss love and marriage, navigating those relationships and investing, the tools you need for success, and finally, how important your choices are. Enjoy this conversation with Shay. All right. Well, we've got a bit of a special one today. We have Shay Whitton. So you're going to see me interview not only Jason, Sam, and now we have Shay, who is a bit more behind the scenes than maybe Jason or Sam, but she's the third owner of the big group of companies that makes up Positive Real Estate Group. And, you know, one of the original founders alongside Jason and Sam for the Positive Real Estate that you guys know. She's married to Jason, which makes her extra special. And if I can say this, Shay, I don't really like grouping you like this, but you're the Navy amongst a couple of pirates, really. And so let's talk about that a little bit. So Shay, awesome to have you here. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Tab. Yes, I do remember an event we held for the team where we actually had pirate hats and Navy hats. We got everyone to divide themselves up into pirates and Navy. And yes, definitely squarely in the Navy camp. But, you know, as everyone likes a little bit of good Pirates of the Caribbean movie, we like the Navy, but we also like a little bit of pirates. So maybe that's why Jason and I are so good together.
But you wouldn't want two pirates together necessarily.
Oh,
that
no.
could be a bit of a disaster.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So tell me a little bit about your background, because you know, we've heard a lot of Jason's stories over the years about where he started, how he got to where he was, your guys' trip to the outback and all of that.
Yeah.
But we don't know a lot about you. So tell us a little bit about you, because we joke about you being the brains of the operation. As much as the guys are, you know, amazing in their spaces, you really are. You have a technical ability with the processes and operations of this business that is fundamental to the business performing and being able to look after and you know, coach so many clients through property investing. And someone listening to this might go, I'm wanting to hear about property, but property is part of creating wealth. And why we've got Shay here today is to talk around, if you know, you can't only have a business. If you've got a business, you've got to do something with that, with what the business generates. You've got to put that into property as one aspect. So we're here to talk about the whole thing about building wealth and how you keep it and the lessons learned along the way. So tell us a bit about your background.
Well, I suppose, you know, something that might be relevant to the listeners of the podcast is that I grew up with my parents renovating, and even my grandma would always be renovating something. So I feel like houses definitely were in our blood. And I think probably the most significant renovation happened around that 80s time, where interest rates were crazy, right? They were that 17, 18, 19, 20%. And my dad lived in Sydney, and his partner Sharon, they could afford those interest rates, but they bought an investment property actually up around Kingscliff in northern New South Wales. So they did that. Mum and Steve were, not the TV producer and the secondary school book publisher living in Sydney on their very executive wages. Mum was actually working as an actress at a theatre restaurant when theatre restaurants were still a thing. And Steve was at university, and he would, on his uni holidays, go barramundi fishing for the 3-month break of holidays up at Wyndham. And so they had this really gig economy, intermittent income, which, as you can imagine, in the 80s was not something that was conducive to getting a loan ever. And they thought that if they didn't get into the housing market, it was never going to happen. So, bad situation, good was that my grandparents had sold their property in Mount Lawley in Western Australia, and they'd moved then to Bayswater, which was kind of like going down in scale in suburbs, but they had all this money. And so they actually then lent it to Mum and Steve to buy this rundown weatherboard cottage in Bassendean in WA, in Perth, where I grew up, for them to renovate and make some money on. So they had a really low interest rate. Mum was really good with the numbers and the banking. We had like the purse money for petrol and for food, and she'd pay Nan back, and she kept all of it there. But I think the interest rate they got maybe was like 5% or 10% or something. It was crazy. It was small. But I lived through that renovation of, the taking the back half of the house off and picking the wallpapers and going to the demolition yards and getting the jar of floorboards and doing all of that. But we managed to sell it then within 7 years, which was the old cycle, and it doubled in price. So then we got to move to another suburb, which was closer to my stepdad's job. He'd graduated by then. And for those people who know Perth very well, he actually worked at Atlantis, which was the marine theme park in Perth. And he was a marine biologist, and we were closer to there. So we moved to Edgewater, which is a little bit closer. And then they ended up selling that after a year, and they moved to Yanship, where they still own a property up there. And I went to university. So I think that's my first property stuff that really happened. But I my first part of the Navy was I ended up at the University of Western Australia and sort of left home. And I started my degree doing microbiology and molecular biology.
I was going to say that's where the marine biology comes in.
Yeah, my stepdad was very influential in picking what I wanted to do. And I was actually 6 months from finishing my degree and thought, I think I've done the wrong degree. I don't want to be a lab technician. I don't know what I want to do. There weren't a lot of jobs around at the time. It was that time where it was, late 80s, early 90s. There's a big unemployment rate. And I'm like, I'm never going to make any money. I remember, and those people who know Perth well, where University of Western Australia campus is, it's right near quite ritzy suburbs. And I remember walking around looking at all these houses and thinking about my friends who were doing medicine or dentistry or law or these other things I'm doing at Bachelor of Science. And I'm thinking, how do these people get these houses in these big suburbs? How do you get these jobs where you earn so much money you can afford to buy them? Not in my wildest dreams did I even think that you started a business. There was nothing in my world that said you started a business. I had none of that. It was, go to school, get good grades, go to university, and that's your ticket out of, living in the gig economy, get a good job. So, then comes Jason, and a few of you have heard that story. So we actually met at the Pearce Air Force Base in Perth. And he was behind the bar. Well, it's PG, so we won't go into anything else. But that was that's going to be 30 years ago this year, actually, that we met. So weird, right?
That's
30 years.
Nuts.
That's nuts. So that's kind of how he and I met. But property was something that my family actually did, and his didn't. Right. So Jason lived in the same house that his dad built for forever. Then his dad kind of went and built another little bit of a house in Charters, but that was it. I was always moving houses and renovating houses and renting, houses with parents. I think I added it up that by the time I was 32. I think I lived in 32 different places or something crazy like that. So
wow.
my family were like perpetual movers, renovators. So I feel like I actually brought the property stuff to Jason from sort of an understanding of like,
I did not know that.
Maybe this is a vehicle that can make you some money if you get a property. So that's kind of where that influence came from, really, I think. I will claim that. He'll say different, but that's what I claim.
Well, he's not being interviewed right now. So
That's right. Exactly.
We can say whatever we like.
We can say whatever we want. So,
awesome.
yeah, so that's kind of how I sort of, property's always been in my mind, but I then had this degree thing but I'd kind of decided I didn't want to do this science degree, and I'd worked in retail. So it took me a few years of sort of mucking around different jobs to work out I actually liked marketing. And I had a fantastic mentor in one of my marketing jobs, a gentleman called Graham McConaughey, who actually owned the Lilo brand, which many people will be aware of. His dad owned the brand Coty, which was an old cosmetic brand. I was the international marketing manager for Zog's swimming goggles, which people will know of, and sort of had that career. So pretty much then that's where I learnt about business, because I was started off as his personal assistant, which he said I was the worst personal assistant he'd ever had in his life, which I said, thank you. I'm really happy for that, because I would have left school at year 10 and done typing if I wanted to be a personal assistant. He said, you're a very good international marketing manager. And I was like, great, I will take that. Thank you. But he was doing trademarks. He was doing shares. He had multiple businesses, in Cook Islands and Hong Kong and England and all around the world. And I was sort of, learning all about that with him. And we, as Jason sort of has probably said in his story, we had some dear friends who when I left that job, we ended up living with them, and they actually, Justin ran an opal business. And so we sort of got to see what it was like having a business of your own. And we're like, maybe we can do this. And they actually introduced us to Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad, Poor Dad, because his wife, Ruth, who's really my best friend from high school, her boss was part of that Tony Robbins world. And so she actually then was introducing the cash flow game to her in the business. And so they bought it and came home, and we started playing cash flow with them. And weirdly, Jason won. He beat everyone. And every time we've played, I think in the whole time we've played cash flow, I have never beaten Jason once. He always wins. He always beat everyone. And he was like, wow, okay, maybe there's something in this cash flow thing and property thing. And then the rest of that story everyone knows. But it came about in the starting of that real estate business was because I had the business background and Jason had the time. So we thought, well, if he's going to go out and he's going to learn about the property and he's going to do that, I know how to set up some business stuff now from Graham. I can kind of get all that running, and then we can have kids, and I can have the kids at work with me, and they'll just sleep under the table, and it'll be easy. I can work whenever I want. It'll just all be, that fantasy we all have before we have children of what, working with
what it might look like. Yeah.
What it would look like, which it doesn't look like at all, right? It doesn't look anything like that. And that's kind of how it got started, is that Jason could leave his job, and I had the really high-paying executive job that would fund us until, things were sort of evened out and I could have the kids and he could sort of take over. That's how it sort of started from there.
Interesting. And so, obviously you guys invest. So, you invest in property, you invest in your business.
Yep.
And I know you also do some stuff with other businesses as well, where
yes, Yep, I do some coaching with some other businesses. Yes.
So you guys are phenomenal with the amount of stuff that you've got going on at any given time. So for people that are keen, they may have careers at the moment that they're juggling and they can't see the gap, they can't see how they're going to extricate themselves from the day-to-day grind, the rat race, as Kiyosaki calls it.
Yeah.
to move into this. They may believe they're entrepreneurial or like the thought of being entrepreneurial. Like I always joke, to me, entrepreneur is a swear word to me. I just go, if someone tells me I'm an entrepreneur, I'm like, fuck it all. Because the ability for a true entrepreneur to cause absolute chaos can be phenomenal.
Yes. Well, I
tell us about that.
Yeah, so there's a couple of parts to that, and I think you and I were chatting about this before. In the positive group, Jason is the entrepreneur. So it doesn't matter what business you give him or any business, he could start it up and run it. He would work it out. He would happily start.
Very creative. Yep.
He's very creative like that, but he actually does it. His passion is teaching. And so we can see that in what he does. So, even when he's doing his Facebook Lives daily or people ask him to talk on stage, it's never ever from a place of ego. It's always from a how do I impart knowledge, and that's always who he is. Sam is very much that artist. He loves property and everything about property. I'm always amazed, even to this day, 20 years on, how much he knows and how much new stuff he's talking about. And I love it. Like, he'll talk and I'm like, great. And so people will ask me, what about property stuff? And I'm like, well, I can tell you Sam said blah, 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 blah. But if you want to ask me about marketing, we'll all do that. We'll all do that. But I think, there's a couple of pivotal things here around a mindset shift. So, it really is around surrounding yourself around people who you want to learn from. So, we talk about, who's your friend group, where are you hanging out, where are your mentors? We talked about Ruth and Justin. They were hanging out with people who were, business owners. And so we were in that environment. So we got exposed to something different. So number one thing is you have to put yourself in an environment maybe that's unusual to you, where you feel uncomfortable, but where you could learn from people who are doing it. So that mentoring space. I think too, it's being able to decide to take a risk and what's a calculated risk for you. So, and then maybe hopefully having a win at it. I think deciding to live on the houseboat, not to rent in Sydney, was really left to field. And I wouldn't have thought to do that. Like, that's a Jason, like, entrepreneurial, let's live on a boat. That'll save us a heap of money. But it did allow us to buy our first investment property, which was my thinking, to get us on the ladder. So it's something very left of centre. And I think sometimes you need a little bit of left of centre thinking to take that risk. That said, we didn't have any kids. We were still really young. So if we lost stuff, it wasn't that much money and we could kind of make it back. So I also think too, then, you've really got to have kind of a what's good about this mindset. One of our dear friends, Scott and Karina Harris, Karina will always say, even when it's a terrible situation, well, what's good about this is it's that framework in your mind of saying, okay, I'm taking the lesson from this, but how can I turn it into something good, or how can I turn it into a lesson? Because, thinking back to that comment I had before about, my university degree, I can't work any harder to make this money. Yes, I can go and get more educated. I can go and get a master's, a PhD, doctorate. I can go and do an MBA. It's going to cost me more money to make more money. But sometimes that's not enough. Can you save yourself rich? Well, no, but you do have to kind of go without some stuff to get there. So I think, we had the houseboat, and then Jason was at Knox, so we got to live for free in a festy, stable place that, we managed to save all our money. We did our budget and realised, we were, before smashed avocado was a thing, we were living a little bit of the smashed avocado life, right? Because we had 2 really good incomes and we could just live happily. And then we were like, we probably need to save our money. So I think if you're in that job, and it's like your career, everyone talks about the side hustle. It's almost like it's just this left of centre thinking, like, what other stuff could I do? And it might not be one thing, to kind of leapfrog myself there a little bit faster. So yes, it's like, you know, not eating Uber Eats so much and you know, going and shopping at Aldi and, you know, making stuff at home and taking your lunch, like that can do so much. But you still want to live.
Yeah.
But is there something else you can do? Like, do you want to sell doTERRA? Do you want to do Amway? Do you want to sell this? Is there some other side hustle thing that maybe you like, or is there a skill that you have? Can you do something on the side?
Yeah.
But is there something even more dramatic than that? You know, lots of people will go back and live with their parents, or share housing with a lot of people. Like sometimes to get that thing, which is maybe, you know, in this instance, we're talking about that first investment property, you kind of have to go sideways to go forwards, I think is probably my takeaway from that.
I'd agree. And you said you touched on when you start a business or when you've got a business that you take risk, and risk is something that, you know, we talk about with our clients. I have a lot of conversations about mitigating risk. There you go, I got it. And understanding your risk and being comfortable that you've got a plan B, C, D, E.
Yeah.
You can still have all the things in the world mapped out and planned out, and the universe just decides to, you know,
that
happens. You a card.
Yeah.
And, you know, I don't know any successful business person that hasn't had at some point in time a challenge.
Yeah.
So for you guys, because, you know, you've got multiple businesses, you've got your own portfolio, you've got stuff going on, you've got charities and other stuff that you're involved with. I mean, it's massive, right?
Sounds fun when you put it like that, but yeah. I don't think of it that way, but yeah.
Yeah, and I'm highlighting it because not just to, you know, blow hot air at you, but what is normal for you is not necessarily normal for everybody else. Yeah. And it's all relative. But then we bring in, and I'm going to throw you a curveball here.
Oh, yeah, good. Oh, yeah.
we bring in love and marriage.
Yes.
So you guys work together.
Yeah.
You have had businesses and all the ups and downs that go with businesses.
3 kids.
Yeah. 3 kids. You've got family that live with you, which we'll touch on in a moment.
Best daughter-in-law in the world. Yep.
So how do you even begin to navigate that? Like what I'm interested in for our clients is what is in here? Like what do you tell yourself daily? What is it that you think has enabled you where other people maybe see things differently or don't have some resource that you guys have? Like what is it that makes you guys different that has allowed you to succeed and grow like you have?
Yeah, I think if I really put it down to it, I think that Jason and I have always had a value around personal growth.
You have.
And we've always both done that. Now, we haven't necessarily done it concurrently, and I think that's where you have friction and challenges in a marriage.
Yeah.
Which is kind of normal after 30 years, right?
100%.
You know, we grew up together. That's what I kind of say happened. So I think recognize like personal growth. So we were always growing, learning.
Mm-hmm.
I think then recognizing that we needed to communicate across that and discuss our personal growth goals or where we were wanting to grow, where we saw our personal deficits as being and what we had to do. So even though we might have been growing like this, we're always able to kind of like parallel it up and not see it as growing apart, but running on this, you know, Mario Kart, you can pick all the different racetracks, right? If you're not careful in a marriage, you can be choosing 2 different racetracks.
Yeah.
So you're not even on the same racetrack. Whereas what Jason and I consciously have done is made sure we might be in different cars. We might have different engines and things going on at the time, but we're still on the same racetrack. So sometimes someone will lap you. At certain times, you know, Jason might have been growing much more than me in business because I'm being more at home with the kids and being a mum and having some growth and experiences there. You know, we've got a little boy on the spectrum or those sorts of things. But you then have to make the time to communicate that. And I think the biggest thing around that, though, is that communication is imperfect. And it's never a set and forget thing. You know, I can't, there was something Jason told me the other day, and we've been together 30 years, and I was like, I never knew that about you. I was like, wow, really? That's what the thing was. I said, I never knew that. I never knew you did that many years ago and you thought that way. So I think it's just, it's that common values, communication, and just knowing that it's imperfect and you have to keep giving it a go to work out what the other person's saying, right? Because Jason, even though everyone sees him speak, I think he's a terrible communicator sometimes, right?
At the risk of my own career trajectory.
It's going to be a CLM if you say it.
This is
No, it's not.
I do find sometimes he has something in his head and he's 10 steps ahead and he thinks that you're with him.
Yes.
Yeah. And it just takes a minute to.
Well, I would, So he is 10 steps ahead a lot of the time. And then what's interesting is, like, my brain will also be 10 steps ahead, but how I would communicate it would not be how he'd communicate it. So often I'll be sitting there going, come on, like, just hurry up and get to the point, because my brain's already where it is, but he's thinking he has to tell me every step.
To explain it and
to explain it. I'm like, please, you're killing me here. Just can we hurry up and get on with it? So, you know, maybe he's a bit impatient. I'm a bit impatient too. So I think, you know, I mean, it sounds really trite to say communication, but it really is. And you've just got to work at it constantly and re-clarify, especially as you grow up together. Like, if I think of who I was when I first met Jason, and then, you know, when we got married, and then when we had kids, and then, you know, then we have another little boy who's on the spectrum, and, you know, then you layer all that on the different stages of experience in the business. It's a small pet business. It's a big business. You're in and out having babies. Like, all those different versions of ourselves, we've just had to make sure that we've communicated along the way. Overarching that, though, we've always had a plan of, like, this is what success looks like for us. And
I'm going to stop you there. Stop you right there. That is a really important comment. So, guys, I just want you to pay attention to this. This is what success looks like for them, which may be very different. And even though this may sound really obvious, it will be very different for you. So when people say, you know, like, do you consider yourself successful? The most successful people in the world will say no sometimes. And you're like, how can they not? So you have to map out what is successful for you. What does it look like? And how will you know when you get there? Because otherwise you're endlessly chasing stuff. So, and I know you guys, ever since I've known you, you've always made time, no matter what's happening, no matter what's going down, to go away for a weekend or a chunk of time. And we know that you're not contactable, and you guys are mapping out stuff for yourselves and for the greater businesses. You've always done that religiously.
And I think too, it's to not get caught up in other people's version of what success looks like. And a great example that, just, you know, when you brought that up, and it's good that you brought it up, is, you know, we had a young team, and we've got a few young team coming on board, and they were talking about their goals. You know, what do they want to do? And they said, I want to be rich. And I'm like, okay, great. Which is normally what you say when you're young. Like, you're like, I just my parents have never given me enough money. I need money. I want to be rich. And I actually said to this person, do you think Jason and I are rich? And they went, I don't know. And I said, right, okay, what's your definition then?
Yeah.
And I said, you know, because my young kid, and I won't tell you what they said because I don't want to betray their confidence and stuff like that. But it was really interesting because we didn't look like he thought rich
looked like,
right?
Yeah.
And I think that'll, this has probably been Positive's philosophy from the beginning, is that we just want to look normal. We're not, we've got some very nice cars, but we're not going to put the cars in our ads. We're not going to put the jets in our ads because, we don't have any jets, and I wouldn't want it. It's a waste of money. Or boats, right?
I didn't know you had a jet.
I don't have a jet. It's probably in someone's toy box somewhere in the house. I'm sure I've got one somewhere. But like the fast cars, the jets, the boats, the lifestyle, whatever design. Like, and I've got beautiful designer shoes and I've got all that stuff, but that's not my everyday. And I think that once you work out as a young person, it's not about the stuff, and that money really just gives you choices from your portfolio and those sorts of things. Then it's about what are you choosing to do with it. So for this person, they were like, well, you don't look like that. And I said, okay, and they said, well, then their question was, how many properties do you have? And I said, why does it matter? Because I could have lots and they could be useless, right? So we then got into a conversation about, work it out. Like, and I know that the coaches and everyone does that here.
100%.
But everyone's look of what success looks like doesn't have the same number on it, and it also doesn't have the same vehicles. And when I talk about either business or shares or property or wherever they are, but mostly it doesn't actually have the same heart and reason behind it. And I think that that's the thing with Jason and I, like personal growth in there, family's very important to us, and being able to look after them into the future. And being able to have choices. That's kind of what it's been for us to feel like there's, for us, success is having, stability and security. And if we could still keep the lifestyle that we want to have without having to work if we didn't want to, we'd still like working and doing stuff, but that's what it looks like. So it has a number, you can work it out. But that's
and that's what the coaches do with the clients, right? They talk about their goals, they drill down into them, and then they help clients put a number on it. Because for you guys, sometimes you've got
changed though, Tab. And that's the thing that I think people forget, is that
absolutely
that has changed so much over time. If you ask
your
my
goals, you mean
100%.
Yeah.
Because where you start out, like, okay, our first thing was like, right, get a property. Okay, we got a property, tick, done. Okay, what now? Now you've done that, what next? What does that look like? And then you add in the factors of life, kids, family. I know I hear, some stories of people divorced, and, sickness, all that stuff, all the things that, marriages, engagements, babies, grandkids, all that stuff happens along the way. And every time you have one of those significant events, you have a reset, which is kind of why you said, like, we always take time off to go, what's the theme or the thing for this year? Like, what are we doing? And
what a great question. What's the theme for this year?
What's the theme for this year? What do we want to do? And we'll put the big rocks in first, which is usually, so sadly, the two things at once. Is like, where's all the leadership and quarterlies for the company? School holidays, and where are we having breaks? And then everything else, luckily one of the kids has finished school now, so there's still not out of the school holidays yet. But, it's those things first, which we want to make sure are there. Our holidays, time with the family, time with us, and business, because time to connect with the people in the business where at that top level where it's most important. And then our day-to-day jobs and the school runs and all of that gets mapped around it. But each year, I suppose, it's had a different feel about it, about what's the focus and the why behind it as we've progressed. As we've got older, our kids have got older, our parents have got older, it's changed. And I think it's so important to actually have some other people outside you to kind of like, I don't know, like keep you in check.
I was going to say, it's a check-in, isn't it? It's somebody that to bounce off and to
it's
give
someone
you,
it's someone who will tell you that your shit stinks, right? Sorry for swearing, but
no, you're fine.
like in business, when you own the business and you run the business, there's no one above you telling you how things are. So Jason and I will purposefully put ourselves with other business owners who will just say, no, that's rubbish, or no, that's not right. So often you want to have those people there. You want to make sure that you trust them and they're valuable. But it's great to have those other people come in and look at your plans in your life and ask you great questions to either say to yourself, yes, I'm on track, I'm fully with this, or actually I haven't thought about that, I should consider it.
Understood. And let's touch really quickly, one of your motivating factors, your and Jason's, one of your highest values is family. And so just for everyone that's listening today or watching, when we're looking at bringing new team members on, we like to see what everyone's values are. We want to make sure values align. And it's always great, to see people's values, what's important to you, what's something that drives you and that you would make decisions by. And for you guys, part of that is family. For many of the team, it's family. And so creating the portfolio, creating wealth for yourselves through businesses has enabled you guys to make some important choices. So you touched on elderly family. Elderly sounds funny, doesn't it? Older parents, aging parents.
Aging parents. So I mean, the GFC really wiped out our parents' super in a lot of ways. So where they'd worked, Jason's family worked very hard, Dad and Sharon, big jobs in Sydney. It kind of cut their super in half.
Wow.
And there's, a lot of longevity in the family. So they're still going to be living for a while yet, and the money's running out. There was not enough money for them to continue to live on. And in fact, Dad and Sharon, they were out of their money. And kind of the choice was coming of the money was tied up in the house, but they didn't want to have to keep working as hard as they were, and nor should they. So what do they do? So we kind of all, bought a farm sort of together so they could, still be looked after, still do a bit of the stuff they wanted to do, but then have access to their funds without worrying about where to live. Because otherwise, then you get in those reverse mortgage situations and all of that stuff, and then it's stressful, and then all that stuff. So I didn't want to do that. So it was really great, because Dad supported and Sharon supported me as a young kid all the time and through uni, and get to go on holidays and stuff. So it's nice to be able to pay that back with them not having to worry about where they need to go to live. And they've got that sort of security there, which gives them peace of mind.
Yeah.
Jason's mum and dad came down to live with us in the granny flat. They were just going to stay for a year. I think that's 15 years later.
I was going to say that must be. I remember I first stayed with you guys. That would have been 15 years ago. So maybe 14 years.
It's a long time. It's a long time to have mother and father-in-law live with you. But, by the same token, I mean, Jason's mum does all our washing. So I reckon I've done in the last, let's say we'll call it 14 years, I've probably done 20 loads of washing, and only when she's been on break, which I'm there is that alone, there's no complaining, right? You just can't complain about that at all. Jason's mum's love language is acts of service. So I know she's amazing at doing that. She's, been around to help with the kids. Jason's dad would come and look after the yard while we were working. But they were in the granny flat. And, that was great. They weren't here. Now, Jason's dad's not very well now, and he's elderly and not physically very well, but we've been able to make sure he's got the wheelchairs and the support and the physio and all of those things till it got to the point where Jason's mum physically herself couldn't care for him as much as she wanted you on a day-to-day, but we still can afford to have him, in the care that's literally 5 minutes down the road. And, we don't have to send him somewhere else. He can come back on the weekends. We can get the cab to pick him up. We can hire all the equipment that we need for him to be home on the weekend with us. And then he can go back and have some care, and Jason's mum can have a rest. It's allowed us to have those choices. And I think another thing for us, our youngest, as you know, is on the spectrum, and he's got old school high functioning Asperger's and ADHD, but it's ASD and ADHD. To have the flexibility to, work in and around Jake in our job, but also the choice of school, to have him not in school, however many hours in school, have a tutor come and help him because that's what supports him. And Jason and I were discussing the other day and saying, parents who've got kids like Jake, we just say, how do they do it? I was at the checkout on the weekend. On a basic wage. And there was a mum and dad. They had 2 little kids in the spectrum. They were at the checkout on a Sunday afternoon. They looked frazzled. The kids were grabbing stuff and they were like, don't touch. And I just said, just chill out. I've got ones like this. It's not bothering me. So I just started chatting Minecraft and Roblox and all the stuff they were interested in because they had their special interests. So I was good at that. The mum and dad's like, it's been a really big shock, how we're just trying to get through it. And I think that it's always those things. It's the unexpected stuff, the elderly parents getting sicker before you know it, kids who may have some challenges, other people having breast cancer and all of that stuff. To me, that's the reason that you want to have, other wealth other than your job from your properties and things like that.
Choices.
Because you then get to choose. You're not then stuck with no choice.
No, absolutely. And so if we were to ask you that classic podcast question.
So
to wrap up today, if we were to go back in time and you were to be able to talk to a young Shay Whitton, she would have been Shay, what was your maiden name?
Shay
Matthews. So you would have been Shay. I didn't know that about you. Learned something. So you were going to go and talk to Shay Matthews. What would be the piece of advice you would give her around investing, around wealth creation, around business, around love, marriage?
I think I'd say you don't know what you don't know.
Very wise.
Be open to anything that comes your way. Stick to I do need to have some data and clarity on that before I want to make a choice. And trust your gut instincts.
Hey, thanks for listening to Property Investor Tales. Remember to subscribe so you get notified every time a new episode drops. As you can guess, I love hearing people's property investor tales. So if you'd like to share yours, then please get in touch with me via email at propertyinvestortales@positivementor.com.au. We would also love your feedback, and I would appreciate a 5-star review over on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Remember, you can watch all of these podcasts over on YouTube at Positive Mentor or at positivementor.com.au. Until then, take care, happy investing, and bye for now.